so excited. We have two amazing guest speakers joining us. And we're going to talk about good governance, and good governance is good UX. And our speakers are Margot Bloomstein and Greg Storey. Greg is beaming in all the way from the West Coast. Margot is local here in the Boston area. And before we get to our speakers, we're going to do a little bit of introduction and housekeeping and let you know what some of the events are coming up here in Boston. So as we get going, we want to make sure everybody sets their chat to everyone and in their Zoom settings. And then the other, sorry, I have a kitten attacking me here. The other thing that we want you to do is for any questions you might have along the way during the presentation, you can use the Q&A button in the Zoom chat. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're all adhering to the UXPA Boston Code of Conduct and be kind and considerate and be polite and make sure that we're following those rules. If you have any questions about that, you can go to our website and read in more detail about what our code of conduct actually is. And I encourage everyone to do that and to visit our newly designed website if you haven't seen it yet. We also have our YouTube channel, and you'll see the QR code there if you want to grab a shot of that. And we will be posting this on our YouTube channel. You can also see past speaker series presentations there and future speaker series. Speaking of, let's look at some of our upcoming events. On Wednesday, September 27th, that's next week, we'll be having our September social at the Down East Pop-Up Cider Garden. We've had, I think, a couple of events there that have been successful. And while the weather is still nice here in Boston, I encourage you to get out and attend that if you can. And then our next speaker series presentation will be Thursday, October 5th. And we are so lucky we'll be having Scott Kuby joining us for Change is a Feature. And he'll be talking about effective strategies for communicating product changes, which is actually a really great presentation on the tail of what Margot and Greg will be sharing with us tonight. So we really hope that people will come out for that. And then another social on Wednesday, October 11th at the Down East Pop-Up Cider Garden once again, because the weather will be fabulous in October because summer was so terrible. So we're hoping for fall being fabulous all the way through. And then this is something that's going to be really great. We know a lot of people in our field are going through transitions with careers right now. And on November 2nd, we're going to be partnering with Tech Systems and having a UX career fair. So look to our website again for more details on that. And we'll be talking more about that in some of our upcoming speaker series events. And of course, near and dear to my heart, on Thursday, November 9th, World Usability Day, pair design practices with Zachary Gabbert. That's going to be really great presentation. So we hope you'll all be turning out for that. And then I encourage you all, again, as we know, lots of transition going on right now with careers and people moving around, looking for jobs. Some people are hiring. There's a lot of activity right now. If you look on LinkedIn, looking at our own job postings, which we keep up to date on our Slack channel, on our website. So if anyone out there is hiring, you can also share that in the chat right now. If you're looking for a position, please share that as well. But we're all in this together. So make sure, network as much as you can, reach out, help others. And again, take advantage of that QR code right there if you need to get hunting for a job. And again, there's our website, newly designed, new content, totally refreshed. Come visit, it's great. And now on to the main event, our fabulous speakers. And really, we could not be more thrilled to have Margot and Greg. They're both such exciting guests for us to have speaking tonight. So let me introduce the one and only Margot Bloomstein, the author of Trustworthy: How the Smartest Brands Beat Cynicism and Bridge the Trust Gap, that was published in 2021. And of course, Content Strategy at Work, published in 2012. Margot's the principal of Appropriate Inc., a brand and content strategy consultancy, which is based in Boston, through which she creates brand appropriate user experiences to help retailers, universities, and other organizations engage their target audiences and project key messages with consistency and clarity. She's also a partner in Loop Collective, a collaborative agency that addresses organizational challenges in design systems and governance. Over the past 2 decades, Margot's partnered with clients like the American Montessori Society, MailChimp, Sallie Mae, Linton Sprungli, Harvard University, Timberland, the state of Nevada, and the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority to address messaging in both traditional and social media through design systems and comprehensive content strategy initiatives. A participant in the inaugural Content Strategy Consortium and featured speaker at South by Southwest, Margot keynotes events and teaches workshops around the world, live and virtually, which is what we're getting a little slice of tonight. So welcome, Margot. So excited to have you here. I have long been a fan and admired your work, and many times as a fellow content person, I will tell people I'm working with, well, this is what Margot says, this is what Margot does. So big props to you and your genius and brilliance. So I'm so excited you're here. So let's meet Greg Storey. So Greg is an amazing design ops and strategy leader, and he brings a wealth of industry experience and wisdom to his work, gained through years of work with agencies, medium-sized companies, and Fortune 100 enterprises. It's given him a unique and valuable perspective on what makes design successful in a variety of conditions. He's such a willing collaborator, ready to partner across teams. And just a personal note, I've been doing some work with Greg recently. He partners with Ryan Rumsey, and they're doing some really interesting things. So I really encourage you to follow Greg on LinkedIn. And aside from that great work, he also gives great advice and great tidbits and nuggets of knowledge that if you're going through a career transition or just need help unscrambling your brain some days, Greg will pop up on LinkedIn and he will give those knowledge nuggets, and the clouds will part and you'll see the sun again. So Greg is amazing. So happy to have him here, and we're gonna get started. So let's go.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Rachel. That's a tough act to follow, both that the clouds part and Greg comes out, here comes the sun, and it's Greg's story, and that you can say with a straight face, do this because Margot said so, and more importantly, that people hear you say that and don't just bust out laughing and laugh you out of the room. So I think we appreciate that kind of introduction. Thank you so much. We're stoked to be here. Separately and together. As you heard, Greg and I work together in the context of Loop, and one of the things that we've been talking about for a long time, one of the recurring things that we address through our work is failure. That there are a lot of things broken right now, and it sounds sort of crass to say, and thank good for that, because as consultants, as people that make better user experiences, whether you're within an organization or external to an organization, if things weren't broken, there would be no need for us to make it better. But the problem is, maybe the opportunity is, not all experiences support the needs of all users. Not all experiences are accessible. Not all experiences are accommodating without making people feel awkward or out of place or like they're the problem. Turns out, other than apparently in a Taylor Swift song, I'm not a fan, but I've heard it enough, users are never the problem. It's rarely the people in the system that are the problem. but we still build these systems that don't necessarily acknowledge that people are using them, people are engaging with the products of them, and people have to work within them. So that's what we want to address today: how to build our systems better, whether they are content management systems, design systems, editorial workflow systems, other designed systems, how to build them better so that they are sustainable, to ensure that the people using the tools that we create want to use them, so that they feel like staying within the guidelines, doing things the right way, is better than kind of going off and using other budgets and doing things the wrong way, and to ensure that the systems and tools that we build are sustainable. So let's talk through that a little bit, kind of what that looks like and what that sounds like now, because I think as we move through the sort of systems that we build, the things that we create for our internal users, we've learned a few things. And first is that systems fail when relationships fail. Systems fail us, they fail our users, they fail our end users and clients and customers. Systems fail when relationships fail. And normally I would say, go and tweet this from the high heavens. I'm not going to use the new name of it as a verb because that's stupid, but blue sky or thread this or wherever, or link in this from the high heavens, that our systems that we are so precious and invested in designing fail our organizations, fail our clients, and fail our users when the relationships among the people creating those systems fail and break down. But beyond that, systems also fail when we focus more on the how-to, the what of those systems, the technology and the tools and the components in them. They fail when we focus more on the how-to rather than the with whom. And you probably heard the expression before that this problem is not about the hardware or software, it's the wetware, it's the people that make these things challenging. I'll go back to what I said in the beginning, that it's rarely the people that are the problem. And that idea of wetware, that you maybe heard it first in that phrase, that wetware has 7 ± 2 registers. The cognitive psychologist, I think behavioral psychologist, George Miller first said that, talking about how people interact with interfaces, how much stuff we can remember at a time, how we chunk information so that we can remember more of it. We can usually remember 7 ± 2 things at a time. So if we know that about people, why do we focus so much on just optimizing the hardware and the software we use? Maybe instead we should be trying to optimize and empower the people using those systems, using our tools, really designing better for them. Because if we're saying it isn't the people that are the problem, maybe we need to figure out the things that are the problem to better flex to meet their needs. So we know that systems fail when we focus more on how to rather than with whom and the needs of those people. But systems also fail when they're inconsistent, when we are inconsistent with how those systems should evolve. Because nothing that we create is fixed in stone or fixed in pixels or fixed in the HTML. We're always designing to improve, and the guidelines and guardrails that we put in place today, the components that we've created, they may not meet all of our needs 6 months down the road. So let's make sure that we're building with an eye on evolution and giving people the affordances to make updates, to contribute feedback, to say, I know these components exist, however, here's what I really need. Can we retrofit things? Can we make it better? Or can we add back to the system? Is there a way for me to do that? The other way that our systems fail us is when, so we've already talked, a little bit about how we can be inconsistent with how they evolve. The other way that our systems sadly fail us, though, is when we don't get the communication right around them. When we look at like how we are communicating and don't necessarily meet the needs of all of our users, all of our different audiences. So we should ask, why do we care about this? And some of that comes from the background and experience that Greg and I bring to this work as designers, as content people, as some of what you heard in the introduction there from Rachel. I've been working as a content strategist for I've started saying nearly a quarter century, because it's been about 23 years. And over the past several years, increasingly my focus has been on how organizations can use content and content strategy and design to foster trust, to help empower their users to better trust their own instincts and their ability to get information, and then better bring that trust back to the organizations that are publishing information, that are attracting their attention. And I do that under the sort of helm and heading of Appropriate Inc. As Rachel mentioned, that's a lot of what I wrote about in Trustworthy that came out a couple of years ago. Greg, I'll let you introduce yourself and your perspective on this as well.
Sure. I realized I missed the slide. So I too am approaching that quarter year in design, mostly in leadership roles, running digital product teams. And like Rachel mentioned earlier, that's been an all range of scale, from boutique studio to IBM, where I had 350,000 coworkers. So that's all to say, especially when it comes to like systems are systems, no matter if there's, for 3 or 4 people or for 10,000 folks. Yes, they get more advanced, they're more intricate. But that's all to say, over the years, we both have seen a lot, and we both have seen enough patterns form to kind of recognize that almost no matter what the system is, content, brand, design, that there are these key moments of failure that just kind of seem to transcend what the system is serving, and at any kind of level or size of scale.
As Greg said, we've worked with a lot of different organizations, and we don't show this to say, like, here's the NASCAR slide, look at our street cred, but rather to say these organizations that we've worked with, many of them have been in points of, I don't think they would say failure, but in points of friction where they're anticipating a big change, or they've just gone through a big change and it hasn't necessarily gone well, or they're rubbing up against the need to grow, to scale their brand in some way, or maybe they've laid off a lot of people and now they're realizing they need to still produce consistently, still create a consistent experience for their end users, for their customers, but now with fewer people inside doing that work. Or they're realizing that they're pulling content, pulling resources from a far greater number of people than they ever have before, maybe because they work with freelancers, or they've suddenly grown by acquisition. And now they still need to find a way to be consistent, to model maybe the same tone, the same communication goals, the same look and feel across a lot of different platforms. All of these organizations were addressing some sort of change like that. And that's why they reached out, because they weren't necessarily in what they would describe as failure, but they were in states where they were coming away saying, we can't get buy-in. We're struggling to get people on board with this idea. We've got 5 different ways to do the same thing, and version control is just the beginning of our nightmares. We realize we're wasting a lot of budget because we keep trying to reinvent the wheel. What do we do about that? I see somebody just responded with like the sad emoji. I feel like that it's like the sad emoji, and then they use those tears to sort of seed the ground for an RFP that can basically be boiled down to, help us. Obi-Wan, you're our only hope. Others have tried this, but help us and make it stick this time so we don't have to reissue basically the same RFP 6 months from now. So I think that is to say, whatever failure looks like and sounds like in different organizations, we use different phrases for it, but man, are those phrases don't necessarily repeat, but they sort of rhyme. We're all familiar with them. So let's talk about what some of those stories of failure look like using kind of the microcosm, the example of design systems, because I think that is becoming increasingly to the forefront where a lot of these issues come together and merge.
Well, that, and we have a nice little package story that should resonate with everybody. So, so let's talk about the story of system failure. And this is something that I and some of my peers on the design side have certainly seen. Margot's seen this with content projects in the past, brand projects, but we're going to talk about design systems today. So if you haven't been through one of these fun projects, design systems typically don't start where they say, hey, let's get a team of 10 people and we're going to build the grandiose design system that everybody's going to use as soon as it's done. Instead, they're typically launched by some kind of small effort, mostly internal, with all of the best intentions of getting started and evolving from there. So like any kind of, typically like design or design engineering product project, we go in and we spin it up. So we go and do some research. We talk to some stakeholders. What's your pain? What's keeping you up at night? What do you need? What do you want? That type of thing. We go in and make sure we've got the right resources that's going to take on this initiative. And then we create some form of launch roadmap, right? How do we know when we think we're going to be done? And then the team goes and starts to build things. They start to build components and flows. They start to add documentation. They start to create tokens, which are these little pieces of software that hold and host universal variables for things like color and fonts. And then we take and go out into the wild and we go and review the things that we built with product teams, kind of like a traveling road show. And then at the end of it, we launch and then I laugh because I've seen this so many times and heard about it even more when I was at Envision, but teams will build the system and they'll launch it and they'll host a party, and then there's cake and there's food and they give away t-shirts and stickers. And then they're advocating for the design system and pulling people in from the hallway, come and take a look at this visual thing, and they have a good time. And then they spend the day after and the preceding 6 months to a year trying to get teams to adopt the design system, right? And it's an uphill battle. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard this time and time and time again, but we'll get to that in a second. So then ultimately the design system fails. And by fail, meaning it's not getting the adoption that they're looking for. It's not being used. So like any good design project, you facilitate a retro, what happened and why, you regroup, and then, hey, you start again. We're going to learn from the mistakes of the past. And this time we're going to get a dedicated leader that's going to fix things. And we're going to talk to more people. And we're going to put more design and developers to it. We're going to staff it up even more and create another launch roadmap. And this goes on and on and on and on until, if you've been at this long enough, I'm sure some of you have, you get a quote like this. So somebody that in an event like this left a comment about how they have been struggling for 5 years to get a design system successfully off the ground and adopted. And in talking to the person, they're ready to, they're going to give up. They're ready just to give up and let somebody else take a try at it. Do you want to take this, Margot? You're on mute.
There we go. So yeah, let's keep going down this wonderful path of failure, and then we'll pull back up and say, so what do we do about it? So when we talk about failure, I think we need to look at why is this happening so that we can understand what to do differently. So as I said in the beginning, failure oftentimes comes because we focus more on the what and the how than the for whom, who is going to be interacting with this, what are their needs. And I think this kind of failure, before we go on to that, but I think this kind of failure sometimes comes in with phrasing like focusing on adoption. And this is something where there are different points of view on this in discussions of governance. I'm of the opinion, and I think Greg and I have gone back and forth on this a bit, kind of looking at different organizations, but when we talk about adoption and ensuring the adoption, whether it's of new editorial style guidelines or a new design system or even new branding guidelines, I feel like when we talk about adoption, it's all coming too late, because to me, adoption of a new system implies that some group has created it and now they're pushing it out to the larger group to say, look at this new thing that we've made you. We're Moses coming down from on the mountain. Here's a good thing that's been given to you. What do you think? You should use this. And I think that that is not how modern organizations, how modern communities want to get their guidance. People want to be a part of the solution, not just getting a solution. So when we focus on trying to get them to adopt new guidelines, it's too late. Better that we work with a team in the beginning and start with the people and relationships to learn from them. Well, what's working for you? What isn't working? Where are the points of friction as you're trying to kind of engage with other teams and all? What do we need to hold on to moving forward? And what do you wish was different, so that they're a part of crafting the solution, not just getting something and then trying to run with it later on. So beyond looking at just starting with the components rather than the people and the relationships, the other place where things fall apart is when we don't really figure out, well, where are we aiming? Where are we going? Are we just moving forward, or have we a good understanding of what forward looks like and what the destination will look like when we arrive there? As a content strategist, one of the exercises that I do with all of my clients is to help them establish a message architecture or a hierarchy of communication goals. I think it's so important to know, well, what are you trying to communicate? Because if you don't know that, you're not going to ever know if you're doing it well or if you're just publishing lots. Does the website do what you need it to do, or did you simply launch it on time? Which I know is a high bar in many organizations, but still we can do better on that. We can do better by moving forward strategically by first defining what success looks like. The other way that things fail, the other place where things fail, is when we don't understand fully what's going on in that organization. Where are the maturity gaps? What's going to hold them back from running with a new system? What does it actually need to accomplish within that specific publishing culture to be successful? So looking across all of those, we can see the impact, the big outcomes to address when an organization has been wading through the mire of failed systems. Maybe they've got 5 different design systems internally, or maybe they come to the table and say, this isn't going to work. The new editorial style guidelines aren't going to work because we've been down this path before and people will just keep doing what they've always been doing. We know it looks and sounds like they've stopped trusting each other. They don't trust new guidelines, and they don't trust that other people at the table will be able to implement them. Sometimes you hear that phrased as like, they just don't get it, or that team isn't going to be able to get on board with this. Again, it's usually a problem where we're focusing too much on the things on which we want people to get on board, rather than the very real needs and predilections of those people. We also know it looks like lost time and lost budget because they're stuck in that cycle of spinning through, let's create something new. Maybe this will be the Band-Aid that solves our problems this time, only to launch it with big fanfare and not really get on board with it. Stop and waste that effort, waste that time, burn through that maybe built up trust and enthusiasm. And by and large, how these things build up over time lowers morale. I've worked with a lot of organizations where the symptom that they have of communication issues, of branding issues, of inconsistency, the symptom that they have is in high employee turnover. I worked with an organization, one of the brands that we saw on one of the earlier slides several years ago, a large confectionery company. They reached out to me because they said, we're having problems. HR just ran through this survey and we realized a lot of people don't understand how they fit into the larger organization, what their small piece does to add up to our company's success. We're seeing really high turnover as a result. So we think we need a better way to communicate internally. They did need a better way to communicate internally. They were thinking like maybe an employee newsletter or something like that. But the thing, the product, the platform that they were pursuing, that did not matter so much as who they were trying to engage, how they were engaging them, and the communication goals that they needed to address. They needed to get in line with all of that and then figure out, how do we make this work over time? How will we consistently maintain this flow of communication? That's what ultimately helped them address their issues with low morale and high employee turnover. That's the thing. Our systems fail when we focus more on the tools and the platforms and the how, rather than the people that will be consuming it. And that's why we wanted to talk with this group today. I feel like this is a little bit speaking truth to power, since we work in UX, since you work in UX. If the systems fail when we focus more on the tools rather than the people, we've come to realize that planning for people is another way of saying UX design. When we are designing for user experiences, we are planning for how people interact with interfaces, with platforms, with organizations to meet their own needs. We're in the business of empowering people through design, empowering people to meet their own needs. So if planning for people is UX design, planning for how people will use a system over time is governance. There are some different definitions of governance floating out there. Some of what I go back to is the theory and practice that Lisa Welchman has written about for years within the context of content strategy. But the sort of working definition I think we can use for tonight to kind of be on the same page as we're discussing these things. When we're talking about governance, we're looking at the who, the how things will evolve, and how we're going to be talking about it. So I like to think of governance as comprising the responsibilities and ownership. Who owns the system? Who owns different components in the system? Who is collaborating on it? How are they checkpointing with different people? And then how is the system, whether it's editorial style guidelines, a design system that maybe hopefully includes editorial guidelines and content guidelines, or a content management system or some other kind of systemic process. How is it going to evolve over time? How are we documenting that so that as people are using it, they understand that when things aren't enough, when there aren't enough components in the library, when things are missing, they understand how new things can be added back into the whole, how they will contribute to it, what that contribution and evaluation process looks like, at what frequency, what are the deadlines for it. And then beyond who does what and how things evolve, we're also looking at how do we communicate about it? What is the kind of messaging that goes out so that people understand where and how to access these resources and tools, where and how to contribute back to them, how to engage throughout the implementation process and kind of maintain that cycle. So as we talk through governance, let's think a little bit about how people tend to think about a design system now. You've got your components, the design or relationship model that brings them all together. Maybe if you're thinking of it in terms of a content model, there's the components or the elements description and the relationship model. There's the documentation that says how all these things work together. There's the components that allow everything to work together. And then poof, mix it together, digital experiences. And everything is hunky-dory, except that most of the time it is not. Through our work, we've come to think about design systems more broadly. So instead of starting there, we can take a broader approach to it. We're starting by thinking about accessibility. Who is using this? What do they need from it? How are we also bringing in elements of the brand and people that are kind of ringing in from that perspective? What are the business goals? What are the compliance needs? Turns out a lot of systems, not only do they make the design process more efficient and able to scale so that more people can contribute to it and get it right the first time, they also ensure that design and content can be legally right the first time. Legal departments love design systems because they do help ensure compliance. Ensure with an E, not ensure with an I, because legal departments don't do that either. But also we need to bring content into this process. It's not just about visual design and user experience design, but also how people interact with the content in the system. How it gets built out through engineering. I think legal and compliance oftentimes are two halves of the same, or two sides of the same coin. How the marketing department uses this to ensure compliance and ensure consistency across all platforms and touch points of the brand. And then how UX design ensures that people do have an empowering experience as they're engaging with it. By taking this more holistic approach, broader approach, it ensures that we're not in that space of encouraging adoption after the thing has been created, of saying, hey, get on board with the new thing. You don't have to ask people to get on board with the new thing when their department, when they or their representatives have been a part of it from the get-go. It's a lot easier to evangelize something, maybe a new system, a new process, new editorial style guidelines, when the people who will be using it have also been the people involved in co-design and creating it from the get-go. So let's talk a little bit then about how to get there, how we see shifting this conversation. I think the first thing that maybe underpins all of this, maybe the foundation to all of this thinking, is that when we're talking about governance, when we're talking about creating a good, enduring, sustainable experience for the people within the organization that are using the new system, we need to first look at how are we establishing and growing their trust. A lot of the work that I've been doing through the past several years and then writing about in Trustworthy looks at the three major components of trust when organizations are engaging external audiences, when brands are looking to build trust with their stakeholders, with their readers, their users. And there's three main pillars for it. The three main pillars that I see that work with external audiences, they also work with the internal audiences when we're trying to get them on board with a new tool and then ensure that that tool is sustainable and a smart investment for the organization. So the first pillar, I phrase it as voice, how we establish a consistent, repeatable, sustainable rapport with an audience, visually and verbally through our communication, so that people know and come to expect certain phrasing, a certain look and feel in communications, so that we're setting their expectations appropriately for maybe the level of alarm in a message or the cadence of a message and what to expect as far as how we're talking about and how we're showing details in a system. The second aspect of how we build trust is on the volume of detail that we include when we're engaging with an audience. I find this really helps when I'm talking with groups about maybe how we're starting to explore new editorial style guidelines. It used to be like maybe 10, 15 years ago when I'd be working with a client, I think I followed the model that a lot of consultants in content strategy have used, where I might meet with a team, hear about their communication goals, and then go back and think about what I knew about trends in the industry, what is right for their industry, maybe good writing for the web guidelines, and then I would magically produce editorial style guidelines that maybe would have sections on here's how you make a subhead. Are we using sentence case or title case, more Latinate or more Germanic verbs? And this is how we handle punctuation here. Are you a serial comma organization? If not, get the hell out of here, that type of thing. And I would produce those guidelines and kind of fling them on over, and hopefully they would stick. And it was, now I look back and I'm like, my God, if I would be lucky if somebody gave me guidelines and said, adopt these, and it actually worked. It wasn't a useful way to engage. And I look back now and also think, I don't know that it was an ethical way to engage, but that's what a lot of consulting looks like. Now, though, I know if I want to ensure that an organization makes sustainable change, can embrace a sustainable change and run with it and make it their own so much that over time they continue to nurture those ideas and add their own, whether I'm producing editorial style guidelines or working on a design system or a content management system, I know I've got to engage with them early on around the right level of detail and ensure that they're coming to the table, the people that will be using this new system or new tool, that they're coming to the table ready to ring in about their needs, like why sometimes they follow Chicago Manual of Style versus AP, why sometimes they write in sentence case, or why they always use serial commas there, because they're right. So we come to the table together to talk at the right level of detail. The same thing happens if I'm trying to engage or communicate visually with an audience, maybe about how to use a new tool or encourage them to embrace a new system. Like, what level of examples do they need? We want to make sure that we're always communicating the right level to empower people, understanding that more content, more detail is not always better. Sometimes it just confuses people. I think understanding that, being willing to acknowledge that it takes some getting to know you time around that, and that we may make mistakes along the way, that's an aspect of the third pillar there, which is around vulnerability. Think voice and volume, those are components of really the table stakes of good content and good content strategy. Communicating consistently and knowing the level of detail visually and verbally that is effective for your audience. Vulnerability is kind of a different animal in there, in that sometimes what works best to get an audience or to get a group on board with new thinking, new tools, new ideas is coming to them from a place of unknown, of needing to figure things out together. One of the organizations that I profiled in Trustworthy is TED, and I sat down with the at that time the editor-in-chief of the website for TED.com to talk with her about what it means to be vulnerable in their organization. At the time, TED had been going through some big, I would say, PR challenges around a lot of their more scientific talks, scientific content, because some of the talks that they produced that had been on the TED main stage or at a TEDx event and then brought onto the main stage of their website, they were big and eye-catching and flashy, but they were not necessarily scientifically sound. Other people within various disciplines would sometimes hold up TED Talks as examples worthy of ridicule, of like, here's a great speaker, somebody that sounds great. And what they're going on and on about has been disproven by other people within their industry. Or maybe it was somebody that sounded great, but it turned out was completely wrong. It wasn't that the science in their area of expertise had evolved. It was just that they didn't have expertise as a scientist. They were just a great speaker. And the folks at TED could have removed those talks from the site. They could have taken the approach of adding like big warning labels and disclaimers. The problem was a lot of those talks were very popular, and things that are popular in a search engine tend to get a lot more clicks and continue to be popular. So they got vulnerable with their audience. They got vulnerable with some of their harshest critics and instead said, okay, let's get together. We hear how you're maligning us. We hear the criticism. Let's bring a group together and start talking about what's the best way to put this in new context. How would you treat this? Let's take your suggestions so that we can come up with a better solution together. In going through that kind of process of research and eventually co-design, It enabled them to come up with a solution that included adding context, adding additional links to those talks, linking out to newer or more accurate content that enabled a lot of their critics to now turn to the site and say, they're handling it appropriately. We were a part of that solution. That kind of vulnerability with your audience looks a lot like psychological vulnerability in an organization too, to say, we don't have all the answers, but we'll get to better answers if we work together. So let's do that. Let's talk now about what ideal systems governance looks like when we bring those things together. Greg, do you want to take this on?
Yeah, so let me back up here. Again, this is this idea of a framework is something that one of our colleagues, Nick, kind of built firsthand at IBM. I wish he maybe could have been here to tell that story directly, but anyway, there's 5 components to this. And one is your collaboration and communication. So essentially, this is the core of your governance. And it goes into not only how we're going to work together, but also who's got ownership of what, and this can be done, through RACI or DACI or whatever it is that you use, but that each aspect of the work needs to have somebody who's responsible for getting that thing done. The second is you need a contribution model. So for a system to thrive and for it to evolve means that people outside of the organization that are responsible for the core of making the things, you need multiple folks, multiple disciplines, multiple perspectives coming in and contributing to the system. And this doesn't mean people are out there, getting a Figma account and knocking out new buttons and new colors of elements and whatnot. Contributions can come from documentation. It can come from comments on different components, feedback, critique. Contribution is everything, and it's such an essential part of the system. And this is one of the things that a lot of folks don't get to. Like when they get to that adoption piece, contribution, it wasn't in our presentation, but contributions even more further down the road. And it's oftentimes one of the things that kind of gets deprioritized or dropped. And it'll lead to a bit of a doom loop in creating any kind of system. The third one is adoption. So once you've got people contributing to the system, whether again, this is your internal teams or people within the organization contributing, then you need to plan for how you're going to actually adopt that work into the system. Implementation. So once it's in the system and everything's cleared through all the rules and the compliance and the legal and all the checks and balances, is how then do you communicate this availability of these elements and these flows to all the product teams or whomever is going to be implementing parts of your system. And then to make sure that those things are, the design system folks are syncing that up with all the roadmaps that are out there so that you don't get people creating more net new experiences that they're, if they can, waiting for things to kind of come through this cycle of contribution, adoption, and then into implementation. And then the last piece of your governance is measurement. So how are you going to measure whatever it is that you need to measure about this thing that's going to inform, again, how it evolves? Is it utilization? Is it, utilization part of performance? Whatever that is, everybody needs to be clear on what it is you're trying to measure for, how you're going to measure it, so that then it can inform communication and collaboration, right? And so if you think about it, ideally, your system strategy is going to be some sort of a flywheel. So that, and this gives no indication of time, I realize that, but that eventually you want this flywheel going so that as you have new things going in the system, it's being adopted into the canon, into the system, it's being implemented and then measured. You now then have data to go back to your core multidisciplinary team just to help inform what is it that we need to do next, right? And this is all very key to the evolution, successful evolution of a design system, but also the successful launch adoption, all the things of a system. So just quickly, we'll wrap this up. Is how do you change the conversation? So if any of this is news to you, anything that we've talked and shown you, then you likely need to have a different conversation at work, because your technology is not going to solve the problems. And I think we've made that clear, or we've tried to make that clear. But if you're on the path of trying to make it so that tools, different use of the tools, new tools are not going to solve the problems that people are having in mass with systems. Likewise, if this is not news to you, then consider your worldview validated. You're right. We're here to tell you that. And it likely means you need to have a different conversation at work, right? So it's not often you get someone kind of coming in, and there probably is a couple of you saying, I've been saying this all along. And so we're here to tell you, yep, you're right. And so go have that conversation with your people at work tomorrow. So, like, does this sound familiar? Do any of these things sound familiar, where you run into problems and they say, we're going to contract out with an outside agency. We can't use the system because, you know, what we're building, what we're trying to create is just too unique. We can't be bound by the system, right? Our needs were snowflakes. We just can't use a tool, a system. Also, why are you pushing a new tool on us? Like, quit coming to us and asking us to adopt this thing where we've got our own flow. We know how we need to work. We know what we need to do. We don't need to bring in somebody else's thing into our process. Or more importantly, I don't know anything about what you're talking about. I've never heard of your system. I've never seen anything about your system. This is all news to me. And if it does sound familiar, then that's something that Margot and I and each of our different practices and other Loop partners can come and talk to you about. Margot, do you have anything to add with that?
No, thank you all very much, because I think those pain points that Greg was just listing off, that we all hear too much of, you know, I can't work within this, it constrains my creativity, or yay, a new CMS. This is going to solve everything, or whatever the tool is, it's going to solve everything. I think those are the pain points that we've heard from so many organizations. Most of the organizations listed up on the big NASCAR slide, and I think we don't phrase it as failure, but that's what system failure sounds like. So let's move beyond that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Greg and Margot. That was an amazing masterclass in storytelling, as well as being an amazing and informative presentation about governance. I have a question for you guys, because what do you do if you're not the leader on a team, which is doing exactly what you laid out at the beginning, and kind of going about building the system that way? And the leader believes in that failed process as the way. What do you do if you're on a team like that? And I speak from personal experience. I was on a team where that was exactly the approach, and the leader of that team was so convinced that was, you know, the perfect approach and the way forward. But you know, there was none of the people stuff happened. So it didn't work. The adoption didn't happen exactly as you foretold it. So what do you do if you're someone who's, you know, on a team, but you're not at that top level, so you can't really make the decisions or correct the course of the sinking ship?
Well, I think one of the things you can do, and there's going to be a point where, you know, is the leader going to be receptive to ideas or not? And I would say if they're not receptive, then you might want to build your own little coalition with your peers in other departments and see if you might be able to get, you know, establish a flanking maneuver. But I think the biggest piece of advice I would have is if you bring this message, if you build your case and you take it to the leader and they're not listening, then go find a new leader who will, right? But the other thing too is, and I think in systems, especially in design systems, it doesn't take much of a Google search to go find quotes like I showed you, where the person's writing like, I've been doing this for 5 years, right? And so at that point, if you build evidence to say, listen, keep doing this over and over again, we all have definitions for what that is. And I think if you can bring some anecdotal evidence and present it as best you can, but not just the problem, but also the, what is a different way, right? And that's also part of a classic response, but not just to point out, hey, we shouldn't do it this way because these people couldn't figure it out. But also here's a different path forward. But I can't emphasize that enough, is if you're going to your director or your VP or whatnot, they're not listening, go sideways. And I think you'll find that there will be folks that your ideas, your message will resonate. And you'll find a happier path there.
I would add on to that. I think in many situations, following the money helps, and also starting small. So by that, I mean, with following the money is if you can demonstrate how it will save money to engage with particular users early on, or to consider multiple options and communicate around them how that process will save money so that you don't end up having to throw out an also ran kind of option later on in the process. Demonstrating how you can save money oftentimes is enough to get people on board with a new idea. Sometimes that's also the thing that encourages taking a more systematized approach that allows for content reuse or allows people to work more efficiently. And as Greg said, that might not be something that resonates with like your direct line manager, but maybe it's something that will resonate with somebody that owns another part of the budget, like another product lead or something like that. And as far as starting small, what I've seen again and again, especially in organizations that maybe are resistant to either investing in governance, investing in ways to maintain something over time, or investing in user research, is that if we can demonstrate the value of just engaging in research and governance planning with maybe one small group of users, maybe one academic department or one product line, demonstrate the value of it with them, that can be something that we stand up then as kind of the dog and pony show to share, or the sort of road show to share across the rest of the organization, to say, look, they're working in compliance. They're using a system that allows them to work more efficiently, to do more with fewer people, or to free those people up to focus on really creative content production. They're doing well with it. They're reaping the rewards. They're enjoying the work and increasing morale. Well, what did they do differently? And can you do that too? Sometimes that is enough to bring more people over to say, it's better to do it this way than some crazy wackadoo way.
If I can add one more point, because we're all in digital here. So if you want to win hearts and minds, go talk to engineering, because engineers hate doing things a second, third, fourth time. And they really don't like it when they have to code something brand new when they know it's in a catalog somewhere. So if you really want to win support for this, go talk to the people that absolutely do not like, they dislike having to create bespoke things, right? And doing things like 10 times over and over again. Those people they'll have your back.
So that's a great point, Greg. And that gets to the other point about how do you, as an individual, or, no matter what level you're at in your organization, help shift the culture from being solution focused to being people focused, as you mentioned at the outset, right? Because I loved what Margot said about, UX being planning for people, but I forget what you said exactly, I wrote it down, but getting to governance, right? So how do you, if you're in a sort of solution focused, oh, we're just gonna make the thing and that thing will fix everything kind of culture, how do you become an influencer or shifting the culture toward being more people focused?
I think some of it is in what you share, and some of it is in how you share it. So I think by sharing examples of maybe it's work products or tools or processes with it that are current within your culture that have been sustained, that, no, I shouldn't phrase it like that, that people have committed to sustaining over time. Maybe they're contributing to them, they're continuing to evolve those systems. I think by spotlighting those examples, you draw attention to that being a better way. And then as far as how you share them, we bring more attention to the people involved in processes when we present work in the active voice, when we talk about who did what on a project, the process that those people went through, how much time it took them. We take attention away from the people in processes when we say like a site launched, or the design system was stood up, when we take the people out by phrasing it all in passive voice. And it sounds like I'm beating this grammatical drum, but it matters. We keep people in the process when we talk about the people in the process and the real impact on them. When morale goes down, morale doesn't go down, people lose morale. When headcount goes down, it isn't that headcount's going down, people are leaving your company. Those are the issues that we can address.
So I'd add to that, Rachel, I would say for me, it's always exercising or practicing empathy. And so if you take a look at the solution-based focused folks, if you were to look at that map of, you know, all the people that are kind of involved in this, right, like this. So if you think about like business and engineering, you know, product folks, maybe even brand, some of these folks are going to be very solution focused because that's a very solution world. But you go talk to accessibility and compliance, content is always a good one, and legal. In other words, go talk to the departments that normally don't get attention from UX designers, and just go talk to them. Don't come to them with all your problems. I think a lot of these issues can be solved through what Peter Merholtz would say is diplomacy, right? So go make relationships. You can't have people without relationships. You have to have some kind of connective tissue, and it doesn't matter if it's you know, you share the same love for a certain dog, or you're really into the work, like whatever that is, but establish a baseline of some kind of interaction, you know, relationship with interaction. And I feel like this takes time. So it's not a simple switch where you just change culture. My guess is everybody knows that here. But that's where I would go is, you know, find those areas that normally don't get love and then work your way in, because the more relationships you can build in these other areas, these other groups, then you can start chipping away at those folks that are normally very much just solution focused.
Awesome. I love that connective tissue part. Any other questions anybody has? Hey, I think that's it for questions. So I just want to thank Margot and Greg so much for taking the time tonight to spend with us and for all this great content. It has been a pleasure.